Under the banner of permanent neutrality, the small country of Switzerland not only remained unscathed during the two world wars but also reaped numerous benefits. It seems that Switzerland's permanent neutrality played an indispensable role in making it the economically highly developed and politically carefree nation it is today. However, the reality is that permanent neutrality is not the secret to a nation's prosperity. This banner is actually a mask that conceals Switzerland's inherent nature of self-preservation. Historically, Swiss society has been quite fierce. On this small piece of land, various local and foreign forces have constantly battled each other. In August 1291, the three cantons of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden formed a permanent alliance. Historically known as the Eternal Alliance of the Three Cantons, in the Battle of Morgarten in 1315, they defeated the powerful Habsburg Duke Leopold, marking a significant triumph. Over the next 200 years, the Three Cantons Alliance gradually expanded into the Confederation of Argau, forming the loose, Old Swiss Confederation. Once united, this force beneath the Alps began a fervent external expansion. In the latter half of the 15th century, the Burgundy Wars and the Swabian Wars marked the peak of the Old Swiss Confederation's expansion. After these two wars, their territory once expanded to Milan in northern Italy. This great victory made the Swiss overly confident, unaware that their military power in Milan had already reached the bottom line of French King Francis I. In the Battle of Marignano in 1515, French artillery and heavy troops, relying on their massive numerical advantage, defeated the Swiss army. The Swiss, who had been sailing smoothly, realized that their years of victories were merely fueled by passion. As an inland small country, they lacked the real capital for hegemony. From then on, the Swiss Confederation began to retreat to their homeland. During the war, France, which knew of the Swiss's martial prowess, also did not want to remain hostile to this spiky little country. A year after the Battle of Marignano, they signed a permanent agreement with France, and later in 1521, they signed an alliance treaty. On the other side, with their old rival, the Habsburg dynasty, the Swiss also signed the Swiss-Habsburg alliance. Switzerland's neutrality was, in fact, a recognition of retreat after realizing their limitations. Regardless of the purpose, the banner of neutrality was established. Switzerland's first neutrality was maintained until the rise of Napoleon. After the outbreak of the French Revolution, a faction in Switzerland advocated aligning with France, with enough strength to counterbalance the neutralists. In 1798, Napoleon occupied Switzerland, and in 1803, through adjusting laws and mediating a constitution, he reshaped Switzerland's political order, making Switzerland willingly become France's puppet. To show loyalty, Switzerland provided France with 4 regiments of troops, who followed Napoleon in his southern and northern campaigns. With a big brother leading the way, Switzerland no longer maintained neutrality during those years until Napoleon was disastrously defeated on the Russian battlefield in 1812. At the Congress of Vienna in 1815, as nations sought to punish France, Switzerland presented itself as a victim and loudly proclaimed neutrality. This successfully moved the major powers at the conference, who all signed declarations recognizing Switzerland's neutrality. It was then that Switzerland's permanent neutrality truly gained international recognition. Leveraging the banner of neutrality and the prestige left from past expansions, Switzerland developed smoothly over the past few centuries. During the 30 Years' War in 17th century Europe, when various large and small countries were exhausted on the battlefield, with German-speaking states experiencing population losses of over a quarter, Switzerland began to peacefully develop its economy based on the principle of neutrality. It was during this period that Switzerland's proud clock-making industry and dairy products sector experienced rapid growth. A German writer of that era, Grimhausen, in his novel Redson's Adventures, described Switzerland through the protagonist's words, "Compared to other German-speaking regions, this country is very unfamiliar to me, like feeling in Brazil or China. I consider it a paradise." Permanent neutrality is not only a talisman but also a golden banner. Switzerland has always been a melting pot of various ethnic groups in a central area. After the Congress of Vienna in 1815, it became a safe haven for the financial world, with a large influx of capital laying the foundation for the development of Swiss banking. Since then, Switzerland has extended the concept of neutrality into the financial sector. To this day, Swiss banks hold a quarter of the world's offshore wealth. According to UBS Group's 2023 annual report, just this one company's total assets reached $171 trillion, which is twice Switzerland's GDP at that time. With the financial and manufacturing prosperity brought by permanent neutrality, Switzerland's per capita GDP surpassed $100,000 by 2033. Moreover, the benefits of permanent neutrality for Switzerland do not stop there. Today, Geneva is known as Switzerland's diplomatic capital, but many people don't even know that the actual federal government is located in Bern, not Geneva. Moreover, before the 19th century, Geneva was not part of Switzerland. It was during the Congress of Vienna after the War of the Second Coalition that European powers, while being impressed by Switzerland's permanent neutrality, also incorporated Geneva, which was then an independent state, into Swiss territory. Geneva is called Switzerland's diplomatic capital because the city hosts the headquarters and major branches of various international organizations, such as the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, the International Telecommunication Union, and the United Nations European headquarters in Greece. In terms of international organizations, renowned cities like New York in the USA and The Hague in the Netherlands cannot compare to Geneva. Even today, Geneva remains the preferred location for hosting international conferences. The first Ukraine Peace Summit, which opened on June 15, 2024, was held in Geneva, with 91 participating countries. These international institutions and conferences are Switzerland's most important soft power, allowing this small country to have a voice far beyond its actual national strength. Under the banner of permanent neutrality, Switzerland has prospered greatly. However, over the centuries, permanent neutrality has at most been a slogan for the Swiss. When real conflicts of interest arise, Switzerland doesn't hesitate to cooperate with major powers, even under the guise of neutrality. For a country to be considered neutral, it must first gain international recognition. To obtain this recognition, a country must follow the international community's expectations for neutral nations. At the Second Hague Conference in 1907, conventions regarding the rights and duties of neutral powers in land and naval warfare were signed, known as the Hague Convention 5 and the Hague Convention 13 of 1907. These required neutral countries to refrain from actions that favor either side in a conflict. When these treaties were signed, Switzerland was one of the countries to sign them and formally joined the agreements as a neutral country 3 years later. In 1916, the nations reaffirmed Switzerland's neutrality. Regardless of Switzerland's conduct during the Napoleonic era and whether it contradicted its neutral stance, at least by the 20th century, such actions should not have happened again. However, during World War II, Switzerland decisively abandoned its stance. At the start of the war, a significant portion of the wealth the Nazis looted from various countries was stored in Swiss banks. To take full control of Switzerland, Germany drafted the Operation Tannenbaum Plan in 1940. Mussolini of Italy also threatened to annex Switzerland's Ticino canton. Yet, when Germany invaded France, it deliberately bypassed Switzerland. Hitler's decision not to execute the plan was due to Switzerland secretly providing favors to Germany in exchange for its own safety, violating the neutrality agreements from the very beginning. This was only the start. As the Nazis rose to power, Switzerland immediately provided Germany with a loan of 150 million Swiss francs and strengthened trade with Germany and Italy, aiding these fascist countries in accumulating resources for war. In 1943, British intelligence discovered a startling phenomenon. The amount of gold Germany was selling on the market exceeded its total gold reserves at the start of the war. After ruling out other possibilities, the only likely source of this gold was from the Nazi regime's plunder, which had been deposited in Switzerland. When Germany began its mass persecution of Jews, the Swiss government cooperated by announcing that Jews should not be regarded as political refugees. Many Jews trying to escape to Switzerland or use Switzerland as a transit point to other countries were blocked at the borders. Even Jewish refugees who had legally entered Switzerland with visas were expelled. In some cases, they were handed directly over to German troops. Swiss historian Edgar Bonjour described this dark chapter in Switzerland's history, stating that from 1932 to the summer and winter of 1943, Switzerland's treatment of refugees marked the darkest period. During World War II, Jewish refugees expelled from Switzerland found it difficult to find refuge in traditional asylum countries, and many perished as a result. Even half a century after the war ended, Switzerland's secret collaboration with the Nazis continued to be unearthed. In the 1990s, more and more evidence revealed that Swiss banks had helped the Nazis launder money and hide gold during the war. Additionally, many Jewish assets deposited in Swiss banks were never returned. As the scandal grew, the World Jewish Congress demanded $20 billion in compensation. The exact amount of these funds has never been definitively determined. Under pressure from the United States and other countries, the Swiss government and Swiss National Bank were forced to admit their complicity. In 1997, they set up a $300 million compensation fund, and in 1998, UBS and Credit Suisse also contributed a $1.25 billion settlement. However, Several Jewish organizations believe these compensations represent only the tip of the iceberg of Switzerland's wartime wealth. They have identified 4.1 million accounts possibly connected to Jews persecuted during the war. But even in the 21st century, Switzerland has refused to disclose the details of these 4.1 million accounts, citing confidentiality. If anyone still thinks Switzerland is a neutral country, they should listen to what Swiss Foreign Minister Flavio Coty said in 1995 when he apologized on behalf of the government. "We cannot and must not deny Switzerland's involvement in the unspeakable barbarism during World War II." In the 1990s, when Switzerland's neutrality was most questioned, the country was dubbed a Nazi accomplice by major media outlets worldwide. However, in truth, Switzerland was not merely a Nazi accomplice. They sided with whoever was winning. That is the true nature of Switzerland, masked behind a facade of neutrality. At the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, Switzerland wasted no time aligning itself with the West, condemning Russia with words and actions. Switzerland froze Russian assets, participated in sanctions against Russia, and closed its airspace to Russia as a show of loyalty to the West. Credit Suisse alone froze 17.6 billion Swiss francs in Russian assets, despite repeated assurances from Swiss officials, including Federal President Ignacio Cassis, that these measures did not signify an abandonment of Switzerland's traditional neutral stance. The position of permanent neutrality is not something a country can just declare. Apart from the Swiss themselves, no one believes that Switzerland remains a permanently neutral country anymore. However, this time, Switzerland's opportunism didn't yield the same benefits it once had. After imposing sanctions on Russia and abandoning its neutrality, Switzerland's reputation, along with its banks built under the banner of neutrality, took a nosedive. Large numbers of depositors have fled, and Switzerland's economic situation has rapidly deteriorated. According to data released by the Swiss National Bank, in the 2022 fiscal year alone, Switzerland faced a staggering loss of 132 billion Swiss francs, approximately $140.5 billion, amounting to 18% of Switzerland's GDP. Credit Suisse, one of Switzerland's century-old banking institutions, had already been struggling for several years, but during this crisis, it not only led the charge in imposing sanctions on Russia, but was also embroiled in a scandal involving the leaking of client data. Under this series of blows, the bank reported a $7.6 billion loss on paper in 2022. In March 2023, deposits were fleeing at a rate of tens of billions per day. To quell the crisis, UBS Group announced it would acquire Credit Suisse for 3 billion Swiss francs. To remove obstacles during the acquisition process, the Swiss parliament even amended the law, making it so the acquisition didn't need shareholder approval. This, however, sparked an even bigger controversy. While Russia's fury had yet to subside, the West also began criticizing Swiss banking for violating ethical standards. Following the banking sector's losses in 2022, Switzerland continued to collapse in 2023. In desperation, Switzerland announced in March 2023 that it would lift sanctions on Russia and return to a neutral policy. Shortly after, Switzerland declared it would refuse to accept Ukrainian wounded soldiers. However, not long after this announcement, the U.S. Department of Justice began exerting pressure on Switzerland, announcing an investigation into the two major Swiss banks' connections with Russia. Under this pressure, Switzerland announced on March 29 that it would reimpose sanctions on Russia and resume assistance to Ukraine. The very next day, it reversed this decision, once again declaring neutrality. By April, Russian clients received threats from Switzerland stating that if they continued to pay taxes in Russia, their assets would remain frozen in Swiss banks. In less than a month, Switzerland had demonstrated just how flexible its notion of neutrality could be. So-called permanent neutrality was nothing more than a justification for their opportunistic behavior. The Russia-Ukraine war has acted as a mirror, revealing Switzerland's flexible application of its neutrality policy, not only economically but also militarily. Since the conflict began, Switzerland has been increasing its military spending on a large scale, purchasing advanced weaponry from NATO countries. To support Ukraine, the Swiss military retired 25 Leopard 2A for tanks ahead of schedule, which were then bought back by Germany. While Switzerland stipulated in the agreement that these tanks could not be used in the conflict, their availability allowed Germany to free up more tanks to aid Ukraine, which is essentially the same as Switzerland directly aiding Ukraine. In July 2023, Switzerland, along with Austria, joined Europe's Sky Shield air defense system. As of 2024, all the more than 20 countries in the system, except for Switzerland, had joined NATO. This effectively means that Switzerland is now aboard a ship it cannot disembark from. Now, it may be time for the Swiss themselves to shatter the gilded signboard of permanent neutrality.